Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and today we are talking 5 players that could potentially be league-winning pieces because of the hot streaks they've been on as of late. This video is a little bit more centered around star fantasy players that are simply playing their best football at the most important times for us down the stretch of the year. And these massive production games that they're giving us, again, could be all the difference for your team. So last week, if you're looking for a little bit more of lower end options that could be sitting around on your bench, potentially have some really nice upside there, that's a video to go check out for those purposes. But today we're talking about players at relatively all fantasy positions that have went absolutely nuts here down the stretch, and if they keep these hot streaks up, are going to be big time playmakers in the fantasy playoffs. And to be quite honest, I hate to say this, but if I was playing against these players and this is a situation you find yourself in, I'd be a bit worried. So with that being said, we're not wasting any more time. Hit the intro and let's get into it. Alrighty, here we go. So again, like I said in the intro, if I were you and we are in the fantasy playoffs right now, if that's the situation for your leagues this week, I am really hoping that when I go check out the roster that I'm up against, I do not see any of these names on the other side of things, because the way that these players have been producing as of late is a major reason for concern, and you better hope that your guys come to play because these players are going nuts right now. This is not a video that's intended to have any relative trade information, as that part of the fantasy season is well past us now. Maybe your league doesn't have a trade deadline, but that's not the intention of this video. It's just simply fun to talk about these players, as these are really the difference makers in our leagues right now, and players that have come on super hot down the stretch to give us all chances and potentially re-spark some aspirations of winning league championships for a few names that haven't necessarily been dominant for the entirety of the season. So George Kittle is the first player I want to talk about. We don't talk too much tight ends here at SFS, but I love talking about him. And George Kittle right now is playing simply like the best tight end in fantasy. I'm sorry, Mark Andrews. I'm sorry, Travis Kelce. But George Kittle is playing on another level. When I read off some of these stats in a second that he's been putting up the last 2 weeks, and even the relative dependability he's had now for the last 6 weeks, it has been something to see. After returning from the injured reserve in the last 6 performances, in 5 of them, he has had 11 points or more in half PPR scoring. For a tight end, 11 points is fantastic. You're talking about, for relative perspective, Kyle Pitts is the fantasy tight end 6 right now, and his highest level of output in half PPR scoring has been 8.5 points over the last stretch of games since he had those back-to-back 100-plus yard receiving performances. So getting 11 points or more in 5 of your last 6 outings is fantastic dependability, really good consistency. And the reason for this is because he's playing like the best tight end in football right now, and he's been Jimmy G's go-to player in the biggest spots of games over the past couple of outings. And that is very valuable, because when you've got Deebo Samuel transitioning into more of a hybrid role for this offense, taking more snaps as a running back and taking handoffs, doing less in the receiving game, we've seen how that's opened up opportunities for Brandon Ayuk, who had the game-winning touchdown in overtime against the Bengals this past week, and especially George Kittle, who is doing astronomical things to be unstoppable and super, super valuable to our teams. 27 targets is how much usage George Kittle has had the last 2 weeks. That is 13.5 targets per game over those last 2 games. 22 of those targets have been hauled in for receptions, and here's the real killer. 332 yards of receiving has been the output for Kittle in the last 2 games. 3 touchdowns, aka 62 total fantasy points in half PPR. That's 31 fantasy points per game. Now, it's a small window. It's 2 games. But remember, in 5 of his last 6, he's had 11 or more. So you're getting awesome, awesome numbers for a player who you might not have had access to for part of this season. And obviously, with him being on the injured reserve, he wasn't even in your lineup, so you probably had to find another solution at the tight end position. I'm not saying George Kittle is going to continue putting up 31 fantasy points per game down the stretch here, but even if he hovers around that 11 to 15, has 1 or 2 more 20-point games down the stretch, and continues to be a menace, I mean, if you watch the game, some of the plays he was making, jumping up, leaping through the air, and making some ridiculous catches, tells you all you need to know. George Kittle might just be the most well-rounded tight end in football. Maybe he's not purely the best receiving threat at the position, but when you add in his dominance as a blocker and the things he can do after the catch, the spectacular plays he can make, this guy is a special player. Into Hunter Renfrow now, a wide receiver. This is probably someone you did not expect to see on the list here. But man, the things that Hunter Renfrow has been doing lately have been very, very impressive. I've been saying this for the better part of a month now. I'm not saying Hunter Renfrow is Cooper Kupp, but when I watch Hunter Renfrow play, I see a lot of Cooper Kupp there. And that's not to say that Hunter Renfrow can replicate or duplicate the numbers, the impressive body of work that Cooper Kupp has had for this entire NFL season. But the way Hunter has come on strong here since Thanksgiving Day has been very impressive, and the ways he's getting his points look awfully similar to the same types of productivity we're seeing for Cooper Kupp. Now, obviously, Cooper Kupp plays in a better offense. He's probably the more talented player. They're both very shifty slot receivers who can win at various levels of the defense. I will say, and I'm going to say this right now, Cooper Kupp is 100% the better player. You want Cooper Kupp on your team. He's the wide receiver one in fantasy. But the comparison here is between two slot receivers who are dang shifty, are getting a lot of targets sent their way, and who are capitalizing on opportunities, having really safe fantasy floors, finding the end zone every once in a while, and just putting up dependable points of productivity. Like I said, Thanksgiving Day was that breakout, that career performance for Renfrow. He's coming off of a 13 reception game on 14 targets against Kansas City. That's a 92.8% catch rate of those 14 targets sent his way. Very impressive there, 117 yards and a receiving touchdown on a nasty whip route. If you saw that play, that was something very, very impressive to see him just lose that defender in the dust. He's the consistency. Going back to the targets, the amount of volume headed his direction. Hunter Renfrow has 13.5 or more fantasy points in half PPR scoring in 5 of his last six games, dating back to week 9. In week 14 notches Hunter Renfrow's 9th game of 8 or more targets in a contest this season. So not quite up to the elite level tier of Cooper Kupp, whose target floor has been 9 this year. But Renfrow is also somebody who is just doing things that are extremely impressive. And for a fantasy manager to have a dependable option who is likely your flex player, the alternative solution to your flex position. If you have Renfrow in a PPR league and he keeps doing these type of things down the stretch, we'll see how Darren Waller factors back into the situation and impacts that production moving forward. But Renfrow has been, you look back to 2020 at a Cole Beasley-like player, another PPR demon who is a target volume monster, catches a lot of footballs, and has a super dependable floor. These players are very, very valuable pieces, and the ceiling that we're getting right now from Renfrow is, again, what I think could potentially be that difference maker as a third wide receiver in your lineups. That is quite the bonus to have on your team, to say the least. Chris Godwin here, another wide receiver. We have 3 wide receivers on the list for today's video. Business is booming right now for Chris Godwin without Antonio Brown on the field, as it's been for Gronk and Mike Evans as well. But in particular, the target volume as of late that Chris Godwin is receiving, the amount of looks he is having sent his way have been ridiculous. In week 13, he sets the franchise record with 15 catches for 143 yards. He comes back in week 14 against the Bills, catches 10 of his 15 looks. I think he should have had. He just barely missed another big catch down the field. But again, 10 receptions, 105 yards. No touchdowns in those 2 games. So if you're in a PPR league, you're looking at, a really, really nice output there. And potentially you could have added 6 points on that if he's able to cash in on one of those looks. In TB12, let's be honest, he is chasing that MVP right now. The Bucs are force-feeding the ball through the air, trying to boost his stats, win football games, and get him into that MVP conversation in the hunt there. I think he's probably the front runner right now. And if TB12 wins another MVP, solidifying him even further as the GOAT of the National Football League. So with that being said, there's going to be a whole lot more passing down the stretch of the year. The Bucs are not going to lay it off, play it easy. They're still in the hunt for the number 1 playoff position in the NFC. So they are competing to win football games, score a lot of points while doing it, and make Tom's stats look great. Chris Godwin is that big slot receiver, the guy who can win at all three levels of the defense. He's fantastic after the catch, has surefire and steady hands. He's able to haul in a lot of the passes thrown his direction and be a really reliable target for Tom Brady, and that's what he loves to see. Chris Godwin's a phenomenal route runner as well, and the schedule is not all that difficult moving forward here. He does have New Orleans and Carolina on the schedule. Chris Godwin's best game this season, however, happened to come against the Saints, which looks like maybe the most challenging matchup left. And then championship week, week 17, you get yourself a big old juicy matchup against the New York Jets. That just might be the dagger performance for Tom Brady, heading back to one of his former NFC East opponents, which he absolutely owns. You know, Aaron Rodgers has his great shares of the Chicago Bears. Tom Brady has himself some even better shares of the Buffalo Bills and New York Jets. That might be a 5-touchdown performance from Tom Brady. If they're able to just mop the floor with what's left of the Jets by that point in time, Godwin could have himself some more big games on the stretch here and be, again, one of the top-end wide receiver one producers the rest of the season. Justin Jefferson for the Minnesota Vikings. This is another player who's been on another level. In my eyes, he is a top 3 receiver for the rest of this fantasy season. Coming off of great games here, and I think he could have had, I'll put it this way. I think there was a lot of production and points left on the table against Pittsburgh this past Thursday night. Now the Vikings, this is an important thing to note as well, have a long week of preparation here to get healthier, to prepare, to scheme better, all that great stuff. With that being said, though, again, Pittsburgh, he played fantastic. He had a very nice output in that performance. But I think that there were some drops, some catchable passes that weren't hauled in, potentially another touchdown on the board that wasn't put up by Justin Jefferson. And we expected him to be a monster in that matchup because it was a very favorable matchup because Pittsburgh's secondary has struggled throughout this season. So I love what Justin Jefferson gives us here. Again, I think he's a top 3 wide receiver down the stretch of this year. In 3 of his last 5 games, he has 140 or more receiving yards. That is monster territory here. He's averaging 11.8 targets per game over that stretch. So as we're getting down the wire here, as these games are meaning more to us, Jefferson is giving us his best and giving us his most productive games of the season. His remaining schedule here in Week 15, he's got the Chicago Bears. The weakness, what is it? It's their secondary. Chicago's back end lets up a huge play to Devontae Adams for a touchdown on Sunday Night Football. They've struggled throughout this year with receivers beating them deep. Jefferson is certainly someone who is capable of doing that. Week 16, Jefferson has the Rams. The Vikings will play the LA Rams. Jalen Ramsey no longer travels and shadows wide receivers for the entirety of matchups. They use him in more of a playmaking fashion where they just have him on the field and hope that he can go out there and make a play for him. I think the Rams would be more suited to just go out there and have him cover the team's best player and take him out of the equation. But that's not what they're doing this year. So Jefferson will have the opportunity to be schemed away from Ramsey, have him moved into positions where he can exploit the number 2 and 3 corners for this team easily, for that matter. And obviously the Vikings are probably going to have to score points to stay in this one as they continue their search for a playoff spot in the NFC. And the Rams are a high-functioning offense that could potentially hang a lot of points on their porous back end. So a lot of opportunities there. And then Week 17 against Green Bay. Look, Jefferson had 8 catches, 169 yards, and 2 touchdowns in Week 11 versus the Packers. So every matchup the rest of the way for this season is a green light for me with Justin Jefferson. And then finally, Week 18, he gets Chicago again. So all the opportunity in the world. I think Justin Jefferson's got a lot in store, and that's why I've got him as a top 3 receiver rest of season. And then finally here, I left this one for the end of the video because Jonathan Taylor, being a league-winning player, who would have thought? Not an original thought on my end, not something that is anything not to be expected here. But how could I leave him out of the conversation for this video? I mean, we're talking players who are going to make the difference in leagues. And like I said in the intro, you better hope you're not playing a lot of the names on the list for today. Jonathan Taylor is probably the scariest option of any of these players because of the gap between him and the next running back, which is probably Dalvin Cook at this point with him being healthy and how he looked against Pittsburgh. But after those two, especially with Austin Eckler's ankle being an issue right now, it's a fairly sizable margin. So the things that Jonathan Taylor has been doing, he is the RB1 for this season. Again, this is not an original thought. This is not something that is all that exciting for me to put out there. I'm telling you something you already know. But just to speak to the dominance he's had this season, He's got 15.5 or more points in half PPR scoring 10 weeks straight. Now, the Colts are coming off a bye week where they're giving their offensive line time to get healthier, Jonathan Taylor time to rest and get himself freshened up. We saw what just 1 week did for Dalvin Cook in terms of his explosiveness. I can only imagine what JT is going to look like out of the bye here. However, if you are in the fantasy playoffs, you are not the Jonathan Taylor owner, and you are playing against him here in week 15, I do have some relatively good news for you. So chances are, if you have to play JT down the stretch here, you're running smack dab into a buzzsaw, and you're probably going to get steamrolled by him. I'm sorry to say that. But in week 15, the Colts have their toughest matchup down the stretch of this season, that being the number 1 seed New England Patriots. So if there's one thing I expect Bill Belichick to do, he is not going to make Jonathan Taylor's life easy for him, and he's going to try and stop this Colts run game because that's how they set up their entire offense. So if I were to have to play against Jonathan Taylor, I want it to be right off the bat here. Maybe the Jonathan Taylor owner in your league has a week 15 bye. If that's the case, very unfortunate for you. I'm sorry about that. I am personally a Jonathan Taylor owner who has a bye week in the league that I have him, mainly due to the production that he gave my roster. So thankfully, I don't have to worry about this Patriots matchup. But if that's not the case for you and you have to play him in week 16, 17, or 18, he's got Arizona, Las Vegas, and the Jags. Especially if you're in Las Vegas or the Jags, if Jonathan Taylor, the owner of him in your league, makes it to championship week or the semifinals, if you end things in the last week of the regular season, week 18, bad news. That's a tough matchup. You better hope your team comes to play. You better hope your overall roster is loaded. Maybe you've got a wide receiver, it's Cooper Kupp or someone else, a combination of a few elite receivers. It's going to take a lot to overcome a player who has a 50-point performance this season because of how dominant he's been, how explosive he is, how versatile he is as a 3-down back. So, again, telling you things you already know. Jonathan Taylor is certainly someone who you're probably shaking with terror if they are on the other side of that fantasy matchup, and rightfully so. Again, I would not want to be playing him. I haven't actually looked at all my matchups. Maybe I am in a couple leagues, which would be something I don't like to see. But again, the good news for those of you playing him this week is that it is the toughest matchup he has the rest of the way. So, Jonathan Taylor, the last name on the list here. I'll see you guys in the outro. Alrighty, how about that? I enjoyed switching things up a little bit and making a more unique style video here as we get into the fantasy football playoffs. Let me know down in the comment section below if you enjoyed this type of a video. I've also got my 5 players who I am a bit worried and starting to panic on if these players are on your roster, so go check that video out. It was also posted at the same time this morning, in addition to our waiver wire ads for week 15, which could be some pivotal lineup pieces for you down the stretch of this season. So, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.